I've been given this wonderful passage to speak on this morning, which is Daniel chapter 6. Many of you who are Christians will be well aware of it. It's Daniel in the lion's den, and I'm going to read the whole chapter. So if you've got a Bible, do turn to the start of Daniel 6. I'm going to read the whole chapter out, and then we're going to dig into it a little bit more and look at what God is trying to say to us. I think we often say at the start of these that it's brilliant how much people's contributions and the songs we sing mirror this. I hope you'll draw some of those things out this morning. God is steadfast. He's with us. He's supporting us. He's our righteousness. Some wonderful, wonderful things been shared. So, we'll start. Daniel and the lion's den, chapter 6. It pleased Darius, the king, to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give account, so that the king might not suffer loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps, because he had an excellent spirit within him. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Then the high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom. But they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful. Link into that word. And no error or fault was found within him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." Then these high officials and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, "O King Darius, live forever." All the high officials of the kingdom and the prefects and satraps, the counselors and the governors, are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast down into the den of the lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. And therefore, King Darius signed the document and injunction. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house, where he had windows in his upper chamber open towards Jerusalem. He got down on his knees. He says, trying to change the page. They always stick, don't they, just when you don't want them to. He got down on his knees and he prayed 3 times a day, and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he had done previously. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. Then they came near and said to the king concerning the injunction, "O king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to a god or man within 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast down into the den of the lions?" The king answered and said, "The things stand fast, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked." And then they answered and said before the king, "Well, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, he pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction you have signed, and he makes his petitions to his God 3 times a day." And then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel. And he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said, "Know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and the Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed." And then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought before him and cast down into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you." And a stone was brought and laid at the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of the Lord's, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. And then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no diversions were brought before him, and his sleep fled from him. Then at daybreak the king arose and went in haste to the den of the lions, and as he came near fearfully where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lion's den?" And then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me. Because I was found blameless before him and also before you. O king, I have done no harm. Then the king was exceedingly glad, and he commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. And the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast down into the den of lions. They, their children and their wives, and before they had reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered and broke all their bones in pieces. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion, people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall never be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. And so this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Well, thank you for sticking with me through that. It is a big chapter. And there's lots to pull out of it, but I'm just going to start by sort of defining a couple of things and looking through some things. So when we say the word faithful, what do we mean? Faithful is a word of loyalty. It's a word of remaining true to things. We talk about being faithful in our relationships, that we serve people, we do what is right. Daniel was a faithful man. And in this story, his method of faithfulness was prayer. And if we just look and set the scene, we've been running through this for a few weeks now, this beautiful story. But we're at a time where we saw last week with the King Belshazzar, he was killed for insulting God. And at that point, the Persians came. So we're now in the second kingdom. When Tom spoke about the four kingdoms that were to come a few weeks ago, we're now in the second kingdom. And that starts with Darius or Cyrus. Those names are interchangeable. They're just used interchangeably here. They're the same person. And the appointment of satraps. Goff talked about them when he spoke on Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. These are people who collect the tribute for the kingdom. And the reason that that's mentioned in verse 2 is because these guys were corrupt. They were stealing from the king. But Daniel, because he was such a man of high moral integrity and dignity, when he was going to be put in place, he would have put that to an end. And they didn't like it. So they sought to find a way to get at him. And they knew that because Daniel was such a just and integral man, the only way they could get to him was through his belief in God. And that, Daniel, if we go back to Marcus's preach a few weeks ago, he explained wonderfully about what different names mean. And Daniel, Dan means God, I means Ismai, and El means judge. And his faithful name means God alone will be his judge. And that's important that we remember that as we look through this. Goff, with Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, they were thrown into the fire because they wouldn't serve a false god. And God saved them. And I'm going to talk about a biblical principle, recapitulation. It's a big word, but essentially we see the Old Testament through to the New Testament is some progressive revelation. It's where stories are repeated and things are added to them. And we see from Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego's story that there are some things added and subtly changed here that reveal about the greater story that is to come with Jesus later. And we can see here the subtle change in this story is that Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego were thrown in the fire because they wouldn't pray to a false god. Here, Daniel isn't being told who he can pray to, he's being told who he cannot pray to. And it places him in a bit of a moral dilemma. And I wonder if any of us have, well, I'm sure we have all been faced by moral dilemmas when we choose to believe in God, or moral dilemmas just in life about doing the right thing. If we move to the next slide, please. We can see that there are loads of these actions, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this wonderful man. Who knows who this man is? Can anyone shout out who it is? It's Martin Luther King Jr. And he was a wonderful pastor in a small, beautiful church in America. But he was faced with this moral dilemma. He knew that his fellow black Americans were not being treated with the dignity that God had for them. He had created them equal, and they weren't being treated equally. And so he was faced with a dilemma. Do I do something about this, or do I just shy away from it and leave it to someone else? And this is a man we know who then went on a 1 million-man march, and his actions changed the way that black Americans were treated. And that moral dilemma he was put in, he chose to trust God in it. And I'm sure we've all got stories. I know, a previous job I had, the people who managed it and worked or controlled what I did, it changed, and they were asking me to do things that I wasn't comfortable with. And in the end, it meant for me I had to change job. That was nearly 6 years ago now. But it was important that I didn't turn away from God. I had to live faithfully, and that was more important than the job that I was doing. So I've got 3 points for us today about how to live living faithfully. And the first one is kind of how to live out a life in prayer or in faithfulness. So Daniel's example, if we look back, at the start it says that Daniel excelled in his work. He embraced the work that God had given him. He'd been in a period where he was very high under Nebuchadnezzar, under Belshazzar, he'd been lowered, and now he's been brought back. And he was excelling in his work. And why was he successful in it? Because there was an excellent spirit within him. It says that in verse 2. And why did he have an excellent spirit? Because Daniel prayed. He lived his life by prayer. It says 3 times a day he went to pray to his God. And he let God lead his life. He was, wherever he was, living by the prayers that he gave to God, and listening and hearing, and let it run his life. Now, does that mean we have to pray 3 times a day? I'm sure there's some people sat there going, gosh, where am I going to fit that into my day? No, it's not about sort of the volume of your prayer, but it is really important that we're intentional in the way that we spend time with God, and that we get into a rhythm that means we can seek him and let him direct his life, our lives. So we look then to verse 5. Daniel's adversaries, they're corrupt ones, not very happy with that. And they kind of give Daniel a bit of a backhanded compliment here, because they're recognizing that they're never going to get him for the way he does his work. The only way they're going to get him is by using the fact that he believes in a God that is not popular in the culture. And so that's what they do. And that will happen to us as Christians. The devil will use anything. The devil, our enemy, he will use anything, and he will do it in different ways to affect others that will trip us up. And we need to be aware of that, and we need to understand that is going to happen. Difficulty will come to us. But going back to Daniel, John Piper writes, "It's a wonderful thing to have a name to live up to. Daniel lived up to his in the most remarkable ways. He lived a life of truth. He said, 'God is my judge, not man. God is my judge, no king of Babylon or Persia. To God I will give account of how I live my life, not to Nebuchadnezzar or Belshazzar or to Darius. God is my judge.'" And he was perfectly centered on that. And so we can see that in the way he ate, the choices he made back in chapter 1. We can see that in the way he interpreted dreams. And we can see that coming out here as he chooses to pray. So in verse 6 to 10, the other satraps conspire against him. They use Darius's vanity to write a law that they know is going to place Daniel in a big dilemma here. And so in verse 10, I'm going to read it again for us. We can see Daniel's action. So it says, "When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open towards Jerusalem. And he got down on his knees and 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously." So what is Daniel's actions here when he's faced with a moral dilemma? Does he go somewhere secret? He's been told he can't pray. Does he go somewhere secret where no one's going to see him? No. He goes to the upper rooms. And in Persian culture, in the upper room, it would have been visible. They're open areas with open windows, so they would have been really visible to everyone. Does he go and pray early in the morning or late at night so that there won't be as many people around? No. He changes nothing. He does exactly what he would have done. People would have seen him before, and they're seeing him now. Did he pray vaguely or ambiguously, using words that maybe he could argue his way out of it if someone saw him? No, he did not. It says he gave thanks before his God, not Darius. And did he do anything to yield to Darius's pressures? No. He prayed as he had done previously. He was totally faithful. And this is our blueprint. This is the blueprint for us. He was faithful. And it says that Daniel got down on his knees. And this is the first sort of link to the story that is to come. When we look in Matthew chapter 26:39, it says, Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, he fell on his face and prayed. And we're starting to see these links between this story, Daniel and Jesus, the forerunning of that. Have you ever been tempted to take the simple way out? Any of us? I know I have. And I have done it. I'll admit that I've got it wrong at times. I'm sure there's some honest people nodding at me that we've all got it wrong. And that's not for us to be shamed or anything like that, but for us to remember that there are those things, like there are times when we're going to get it wrong, but Daniel is giving us this blueprint here of how we can live our life in faithfulness to God. Okay. Point 2, how to react when trouble comes. And this is kind of the middle section of the chapter, verse 11 to 19. Daniel trusted God, and he would rather die than renounce God. He didn't try to argue his way out of it. He accepted the judgment that Darius had put upon him. And I don't think that Daniel, even though he would have had the faith of 40, 50 years of seeing God come through for him, he's seen Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego be delivered, but I don't think he would have known the outcome going into it. He accepted what was happening. And for Daniel, faithfulness to God through prayer was more important than his life. Not praying was a worse outcome than being thrown into the lion's den where he'd be ripped limb from limb. And can we say that? Can we always say that, we'll be faithful to God no matter what, even if it costs us our life? Prayer was Daniel's expression of faithfulness in trusting God even if he could lose his life. And I hope that we can say that as well when the difficult times come, that we can trust in God no matter what it might cost us, whether it costs us work or relationships or all of those kind of important things in life. But the parallel imagery keeps building between Jesus and between Daniel. Here in verse 16 and 17, we can see that Daniel was cast down to death in the lion's den. Jesus died on the cross and went down into death for 3 days. A large stone was rolled across Daniel's tomb. A large stone was rolled across Jesus' tomb. And we'll get to see what comes after that, but these wonderful parallels of Daniel forerunning this story. But what about Darius? What about the other person in this story? We can see in these verses that he, as soon as he realized he was condemning an innocent man, he wanted to deliver him. He said, he realized he couldn't get out of it, so he sent Daniel down to the lion's den. But he said in verse 16, "May the God who you continually serve deliver you." Daniel's actions had a profound effect on Darius. He recognized what he believed and that he was totally invested in it and that it was more important to him than Darius's rules. And he prayed, he effectively said a prayer for deliverance of Daniel because he recognized how strong Daniel's faith was. Jesus said in John 13:15, he said, "You'll know my disciples by the way that we love each other and the way we act." And you can see that what we do as Christians, how we act, has profound effects on those around us, whether we see it directly in conversation or whether we see it in other ways. Our actions have profound effect on people. Us being steadfast, us being faithful to our God, not compromising, living ways differently, has an example to people that gives different questions for them to ask. Don't underestimate the power of your faithfulness, your actions and your ways, whether that's in your school environment. You might not see that instantly. It might take a long time, but there are stories even in this church of Christians having interactions with their friends and then later they become Christians as older people. Those examples sometimes take a bit of time, but it's amazing. In your workplace, people might not come and say anything to you, but your actions have direct effects on what they think. Okay, finally, moving on to point 3. What then is the outcome when we choose God despite our opposition? And this will cover sort of verses 19 to 28. The parallels continue between Jesus. Darius, at first light, he rushes down. So did the women to the tomb when they found Jesus was resurrected. Poor Darius, he has not slept all night. He's worried. He knows he's condemned an innocent man. And he kind of says in a tone of anguish, "Oh, Daniel, servant of the living God, whom you serve continually, has he been able to save you?" Do we think he's been able to save him? Of course. Daniel's response in verse 22. "Yes, O king, my God has sent his angel and shut the mouths of the lions, because I was blameless before him. I'd done nothing wrong before my God, and I'd done no harm to you. You'd set up a bad law, and I'd done nothing wrong." So when we're living in these difficult moral dilemmas, when we're going through these troubles, when trials have come to us, God can intervene. He can be there with us. He can save us. And in verse 23, Daniel was lifted out of the pit and no harm was found on him. Jesus was resurrected out of death on the third day into life. So because Daniel was found blameless, he was accused by people. That's the same as what happened to Jesus. The Pharisees and the Sadducees tried to accuse him. But Pilate said, "I'll wash my hands of this. I can find nothing wrong with this man." It was the same here. They couldn't find a reason against Daniel. The lions' mouths were kept closed by the angel, and Daniel was prevented from dying. We see later, because we know the outcome of the story, that Jesus did die. He had to die to take all of our sins, and then he was resurrected 3 days later, defeating death, so that we could have a relationship with him again. It's important there. If we look at 2 Corinthians 5:21, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Because of what Jesus has done, now we can live out that faithfulness. When the difficulties come, we can stand with them. We can stand in the trials. We can be faithful to God, knowing that he will deliver us through these difficult times. And we also see that God is just. If we think about what happened to Daniel's accusers, there's no part of Scripture that isn't put in for a good reason. While this is difficult to read, God is just. These bad people who'd made accusations, God was just and dealt with them. We might not see that happen straight away if people do bad things to us like we do here, but God is just. We don't have to worry about retribution or all of those things if people do difficult things to us or make our lives hard. We can trust in God. We can be faithful to God and know that he will deal with it in the right time. And finally, that outcome, if we choose. So Daniel has been saved. It's brilliant. But what else happens? The outcome, because of what Darius has seen Daniel do by his faithfulness, we can see that he sent a decree out. Now, Persia was one of the biggest nations of the whole world. A big decree is sent out. Bearing in mind, this is a man who 2 days ago had said a decree of, "You've got to pray only to me for 30 days. But on seeing Daniel's faith and his faithfulness, he sends out a decree to the whole known world saying, "You only serve, I make a decree in my royal dominion that we should tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he's the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers all and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lion's den." That same God was worshipped. He was glorified and magnified because of Daniel's faithfulness. And that's the same for us. Because we've seen Daniel had saw a glimpse of God, and he foreran the story of Jesus. Jesus, the ultimate one, the one who took it all for us, and now we can have total trust in him in the way we live our lives. And so, because of what he's done, we can now live faithfully. And if we think, just in sort of the application of this in our lives, when trials come to us, what should we do? Well, Daniel was steadfast. He developed an intentional rhythm where he spoke with God, where he knew he could trust God because of all the things he'd seen for the previous 60 years of his life, from being a young teenager exiled into Babylon, for trusting God, for seeing Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego go through what they did, for excelling in his work. He had learned by spending life intentionally with God that he could trust him and be faithful to him. So for us, we need to develop those intentional rhythms where we can be faithful and trust God. We need to be regular in how we read God's word and how we understand and develop that relationship with him. Then when the difficulties come, does anything change? No, we continue. We persevere with God. We get people around us who can support us and pray with us and be on the journey with us. We share our problems, because a problem shared is a problem halved. And the outcome, even though it will be difficult, Daniel, can you imagine being lowered down into the lion's den, not knowing what's going to happen next? The fear he would have been going through. And we will go through those trials and tribulations as well. But when we trust God, he is faithful. He delivered Daniel. He will deliver us through our difficult times as well. And when that happens, the outcome is that God is glorified. He is magnified. What Jesus has done is seen through us because we're faithful in him. And the outcome can be kingdom advance, where people see the kingdom of God and what it really means. And that's what happened here. So I hope that's been really helpful to you this morning. But I'd love the band to come back with us. And we've got a ministry team who are going to come down to this front section here. And we would love to pray with you. If you feel you need prayer for a number of things, if you really struggle to find that intentional rhythm with God, if you want someone to pray with you about how to find that intentional rhythm with God, if you're facing a lion's den moment, if there's something either ongoing in your life or is coming, then come and pray with us. We'd love to pray with you and help to set you right. And if you've never known this wonderful Jesus, this life-altering Jesus before, and you want today to be that time, that first time you come and put your faith in him, then do come down the front. Thank you. As soon as the band starts playing, feel free to come down the front. Thank you.